As fantastic a CFP as Mello is, and as wonderful an attorney as I am, please do note that anything said in our show are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
And we've talked a lot on my show about the sanctions against Russia due to the Ukraine-Russian war. But today we're going to talk about Biden's recent executive order, and we're going to also parlay that slightly into the tariffs that Trump put into place when he was in office, so you guys can kind of understand the difference between the two. This will probably be a show only for about an hour, maybe a little over. I'm still not feeling super great, but at least I can sit in a chair and not feel like I'm going to die. So I appreciate you guys for popping in. So Biden signed an executive order, I believe it was last week now, because I had prepped part of this show and then was too sick to actually do the show. But he signed an executive order saying, look, man, we have to limit certain new investments into China, specifically into the semiconductor area. Now, China has been accused of stealing American IP a lot. All right. And this was the big bone of contention out of the Trump administration when President Trump was in office. And he implemented tariffs as a way to stop them from stealing our intellectual property. Now, there's a lot of intellectual property out there. An intellectual property could be the design of a handbag, which we're going to focus on a lot here, or it could be, the secret Coke formula recipe, right? I mean, there's a lot of different types of intellectual property. The bulk of, so far, besides cyber attacks, but now Russia's attacking us, China's attacking us, other countries are attacking us. I'm sure we're attacking other countries. And those are designed to get information and IP also. But the primary way that China has been accused of and is stealing American IP is through things like luxury goods, because we've been very successful in America of exporting our lifestyle. So what we see out of China is that they take a lot of Louis Vuitton bags. And, Americans do this too. Okay, so if you go to any swap meet, you're going to see knockoff shirts of, Assistant Coach and Lawrence Vuitton and all that type of stuff. I mean, our swap meets are full of it, right? But China had been very successful in taking our luxury goods and imitating them and then selling them on the open global market at significantly cheaper. And of course, a lot of the people at the swap meets are importing those things from China. So that's been the main way that China over time has been stealing United States intellectual property. And it was estimated in April 10th of 2018 that the Chinese theft of American IP was costing around $225 billion to $600 billion annually. And again, that's a 2018 number, okay? I couldn't find any more recent numbers. And so what Trump decided to do is he decided to put on tariffs. And I want you guys to understand the difference between what Biden is trying to do and what Trump did, okay? So Trump implemented tariffs, and him and his administration incorrectly said that he was making China pay, when that's not how tariffs work. I did a whole episode on this on Finances, the Other F Word, breaking down exactly how the tariffs work, going through back case studies of tariffs and how they affected the American economy. A tariff is what is charged on a good that is incoming to the receiver, not to the exporter. So when China is exporting goods out, they're not paying the tariffs. What a tariff is designed to do is that when it comes in to the United States. There's a tariff that is imposed by the United States government. And then what happens is that the receiver of those goods has to pay that. And then in turn, what they do is they take the price of the Chinese goods and they increase the price to make them, and the end game of all of this is to make it less appealing and or more expensive on the American market so people do not buy Chinese goods. So understand how tariffs work, because what drives me crazy is when people say they do something that they don't, and politicians try to spin it to that they're doing something that they're not doing. Okay, so that's the tariffs. And so that was a big thing during his administration, was the increase of the Chinese tariffs that was going on, and there was more and more tariffs. Now, just to be clear, the United States has standing tariffs for years. We've had tariffs on the books since the 70s and 80s on certain goods from certain countries, and the Trump administration is by far not the only administration to ever have used tariffs, all right? So I'm not trying to imply that. What I'm telling you is that in the manner in which they were used in that example I just gave you was not specifically correct, okay? But there is, and the reason why Trump implemented the tariffs is because he said that China is stealing our IP, which is true. That part is completely true. So the thing is that now Biden has come out and he has signed an executive order, and it is not a tariff, but what he has basically said is he has said if you are a United States citizen, there are certain industries in China that you cannot invest in. We will not let you put your money into, and they are around specifically military mobilization. So when you're talking about emerging markets, you're talking about typically the BRIC countries, and there's a couple other countries that have come up since then that are considered emerging markets now, but primarily the BRIC countries are your emerging markets: Brazil, Russia, India, China. Okay, those are your BRIC countries, so your emerging markets. And so what Biden has said is he said, look, we are going to, in a small amount, and to be quite honest with you, I don't think he went far enough, because we'll find out something else I'm going to talk about here later. We're going to limit in a small amount the investments that you can make. And the whole point of him doing that is to make sure that we are not feeding China's war machine, that we are not putting money into their economy, into their sectors. And a lot of the companies that are in China are owned by the state, majority. Okay, so it's not like in America where, you know, there's the C-suite executives and private venture capitalists who own the companies, right? These are companies that are primarily owned by the state majority holder. And so anytime we invest in businesses over in China, which has been a darling to invest in for the last couple years, but as China falls more in line with Russia and Ukraine, with the Russian conflict on Russia's side against Ukraine, we've been seeing, and I have some numbers here that I'll pull out here in a second, what we're seeing is that we're pulling more out of our investments in China just by ourselves, because they are aligning themselves more and more and more with Russia. Right? So when we're taking money, American money, and we're investing in Chinese companies, we're helping create different technologies for the Chinese government, literally, because even though you're investing in the company with the hope that it's going to grow, which is the reason why people invest, right? You're also inadvertently investing in the Chinese government because the way it's set up. And so Biden said, okay, look, we're not going to do that right now. We're going to go ahead and we're going to restrict this to a couple different sectors: semiconductors and microelectronics, quantum information technologies, and certain artificial intelligence systems. And this is going to come back in a big way. After I wrap this up and I'll play a song, then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about that. And so they are the most concerned about helping China develop technologies for military modernization and mobilization, and their threats to undermine U.S. national security. Now, if you've listened to my show and you've listened to the Russian and Ukraine conflict, I don't care about the politics behind it. What I'm talking about is the financial implications of that war. And so the thing is that if you've been following my show, you've seen how more and more and more financially the West and the European Union have been financially sanctioning and separating themselves out from Russia. But the European Union is getting hit worse, and most of Europe, because of their closeness to Russia and to the commodities that Russia supplies, like grain and like oil and the grain that Ukraine supplies. And we talked about the Black Sea grain deal and how that dropped out due to Russia. And so that is making us more and more polarized. And in the event that there is a strike on a NATO country, or in the effect that there is a ship that comes into the Black Sea and Russia does confiscate the ship, as they told us that they would do, and or declare an act of war, we would expect that China will fall in line to support Russia. Maybe they'll stay out of it for a minute. And China is the second largest economy in the world behind us. Okay, so this is the reason why China is such a big deal. And because there's different ideologies politically, our way of thinking about politics versus their way of thinking about politics, it's starting to get sticky. Okay, so the executive order that Biden signed is specifically targeting venture capital and joint ventured and greenfield investments. So I didn't even know this term. I was like, what the fuck is a greenfield investment? So let me tell you verbatim what it is. A form of foreign direct investment where a parent company starts a new venture in a foreign country by constructing new operational facilities from the ground up. So you take an American corporation with American dollars, they start a new business venture over in China. They break it off and they start a new venture, but they are still investing in China. And so Biden has basically said that, we cannot have them getting access to our money. This is a situation of national emergency. And he is concerned about, quote, insensitive technologies and products critical to the military intelligence, surveillance, or cyber-enabled capabilities. Now, I'm not a cyber expert. My friend Jax is. That's what she does for a living. And someday maybe I can get her on this show and she can talk all about the different ways that countries cyber attack us and what that means. And we're going to come back to cyber attacks at the very end of this, because everything I talk about is connected. All of it. It's financial in nature, but everything is all connected. And I want you guys to understand the stuff that's going on, because these initiatives will come up on the voting ballot. And I don't care how you vote. I just want you to kind of be aware of the financial implications, because when people vote, it affects however the vote goes, either, whichever way, it affects all of us, right? And then we all have to deal with the outcome of what that is. And I've talked a lot about how Clinton has, with the act that he signed, has exacerbated the incomes between CEOs and mid-level workers in their business. And, we've seen a 400% change in what CEOs make versus their workers in their business, which was not like that before Clinton signed in this thing to order. So it's both Republicans and Democrats. So I just kind of want you guys to understand that. Now, of course, China is pissed. Right? China's like, okay, this order affects, quote, the order affects normal operation and decision-making of enterprises and undermines the international economic and trade order. Now, so let's talk about that real quick, because there is a World Trade Organization TRIP agreement, which trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, which we have entered into with China multiple times, and every single time they violated it in some way. Now, then we give them a chance to clean up their act and stop doing it, and then they just fucking do it again, right? So I'm not trying to be anti-China. I'm just trying to say that China is pissed because they're like, oh, you're going to affect the trade order. Well, yes, but we've had this intellectual property agreement with you for years now, and you've still been violating it. So who cares what the fuck you feel like, right? At least that's me. That's 100% me. That's not anything financial. That was completely my opinion. And so we see that for the most part, the American market has taken it in stride because, let me find my statistic. Since last year, we've seen that total U.S.-based venture capital investments in China has plummeted by $32.9 billion to $23.2 billion. So people are naturally leaving the investments in China because of the simple fact that they do not like, so American dollars, they don't want to support China. So the fact that Biden put this in place is okay, that's good. But I mean, it was kind of already happening anyway. And we want to keep that in context because there's probably going to be a time where as a politician, he's going to take credit for that. But just understand that, yes, some of that is true. But also there has already been an exodus out of Chinese investments as more and more steps are taken towards war. So I'm going to play a quick song to wash that out of your mouth. A lot of my music is very specific to the topic. So this is New World Order, or NWO by Ministry. Yes, 1,000 Points of Light. I do remember that speech. So if you're just joining me, we are talking about the new executive order that Biden signed last week, prohibiting certain investments into the semiconductor sectors of China, and what that means and why that's important, and how that's just amping up more and more weaponizing money. Now, with the Black Sea grain deal falling apart, that, of course, weaponized food. So Putin is weaponizing food to a ginormous part of the globe, as we've talked about on my show. And then with the sanctions and the different things that the European Union, England, and the United States has been doing to Russia, we have been weaponizing money. Now, this is a next step up in the semiconductor focus, where Biden is saying, hey, look, we really don't want to put any more money into these guys. Now, to be fair, we are one of the leaders in semiconductors. And so China is saying, oh, you guys are just trying to keep your stranglehold on the industry. So let's real quickly talk about semiconductors. A semiconductor is the substance that lies between the conductor and the insulator. It controls and manages the flow of electric current. So basically an electric equipment, like the current that flows between them. So basically it's extremely important because it runs pretty much everything. So it's a popular component in electronic chips made for computing. And so that's going to come back to another thing that has been a continued concern by both Democrats and Republicans, and I'll get on here in a second, and a variety of different electronic devices and solid state storage. So the thing is that both Democrats and Republicans have hinted to the fact that they're concerned that any semiconductors that are coming out of China and are used in our American machines could be collecting data on us. Now, I don't know enough about technology and semiconductors and shit like that to be able to tell you if that's even a thing, if that even makes sense. I don't know. That's not my wheelhouse. But that has been something that both parties has a concern over, all right? And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to target the companies that design these computer chips, all right? And so China, of course, is saying, look, so right now the three countries that dominate the semiconductor space is United States, Japan, and the Netherlands, all right? And so China is saying, hey, you're being unfair and you're just trying to cock block us out of the market and just increase your stranglehold on semiconductors, okay? Which, I mean, it's not going to hurt us, right? I mean, let's be real. I mean, if we limit Americans from being able to contribute and invest in things going on over in China, then that would mean that hopefully their focus, if they wanted more semiconductors, would stay more domestic, which could help our sectors. Absolutely. But I mean, every country is looking out for themselves. So without sounding like an isolationist, I mean, yes, I mean, China does have a point. All right. So now Biden has said, okay, nope, we're not going to do that. And so we are now seeing the fact of, well, we're not seeing it. We've been seeing it, but we have more concrete evidence, and came around within the last year. China is pioneering facial recognition. There we go. Recognition software. So they are taking this technology, and they have implemented tons and tons and tons of cameras in China to watch their people, right? So that's what they're doing. Now, America, we have cameras around too. We have a lot of surveillance that goes on privately around America and publicly that goes around America. The difference is that when China and any artificial intelligence, so I want you guys to understand that the United States is doing this as well too. And I've talked on my show to extent about social media and the information and the data points that they gather on us that we give freely every time we post a selfie or every time we do a check-in with somebody, and they can see what clothes we wear. They can see if we have a high-end purse, if we're wearing high-end jewelry, if we're at a restaurant that's very expensive. Was it our birthday? Were we married? Was it an anniversary? There's a lot of data points that they have. And there is a show on Netflix called Connected. And if you guys are documentary nerds like me, there is this one episode where this lady who is a investigative journalist out of France, she was on Tinder. And I don't know if you guys are on Tinder. You don't have to tell me if you're on Tinder or not. But she found out, she read an article that they were keeping all of this data on her, and they had an appearance score, like how attractive you are, an attractiveness score. And she wanted to know how they rated her. And so she kept at them, because she's a journalist, over and over and over again for 6 months. And they didn't ever give her her attractiveness score, but they gave her all of the data that they had on her, and it was 800 pages. So this is her communicating with dudes about what her sexual preferences were. And I'm going to go back to it. You remember we talked about Pornhub and how they're tracking you, right? So this is Tinder. They're taking that information. They're all talking to each other, and they had, her sexual preferences about if she's having sex. And she said, but the thing that was the most tragic to her, that made her the most vulnerable, was the fact that they knew when she was the saddest and the most lonely, because they tracked when she became active, between the hours she became active, and it was usually after she was leaving a dinner with a whole bunch of people who had, significant others or whatever the case is. And she had started communicating with guys during that point because she was lonely and she didn't want to start the new year by herself. And they tracked and they knew exactly when she typically feels the most vulnerable and would be the most active on Tinder. This is just an example. And in the Pornhub episode, that was great, by the way, I talked about all the information that they had gathered on us and how they took that information and kept it in-house and vertically integrated it and then sold out that data to other people. But we're not talking about that now. But what we are talking about is facial recognition. And in order for facial recognition to get better, they need to have data points. They need to have faces so that their software can scan and learn and be able to recognize facial recognition. Now, the January 6th insurrection, that has been, a lot of those people have been tipped off, and then they have been aligned with facial recognition software, or they have just been found out through facial recognition software. Right? And so the thing is that you have to remember that the biggest social media platform out there is still Facebook, but the hottest growing platform out there is TikTok. And TikTok is owned by ByteDance, who is a Chinese-owned company. And China is taking, as is the United States and other countries, scraping social media and getting all of these data points for their facial recognition software. The difference is that China is using it against their own people, which I'm sure the United States is to a certain extent, using it against their own people, and then they're exporting this technology out to countries who have human rights violations. So let's take it in aspect of a Middle Eastern Muslim country who do not believe in women's rights. And so the thing is that it makes it even more dangerous for those women to be able to step out and to try to fight against the government and try to enact change in their countries. And so this is where the ideology between the United States and China starts to really break off. And that's what all of this keeps coming back to, is that China is a surveillance state, a heavy surveillance state. The United States is also a surveillance state, but in a different way, if that makes any kind of sense for you guys to understand exactly what's going on. So I'm going to play a quick song, and we're going to come back, and we're going to talk about, as part of the, so Biden did the executive order, but the other thing he did was he asked for more resources for Ukraine. And so we're going to talk about how much money we've spent on Ukraine so far, how that compares to other wars that we've done, and then we're going to talk about the Maui fires, and then I might have a quick wrap up. It'll depend. If not, I'll save some of this stuff for Friday. So anyway, we're going to play, of course, Electric Eye by Judas Priest. So I think you answered your own question, Trash, but yes, it was Tinder that was collecting the data on her, and I believe they were selling it. Because in that long list of shit that we agree to constantly over and over again, that is written by a team of lawyers that we couldn't understand even if we took the time to read it, basically we're giving them permission. And so what the big concern is now is that there's data that is being shared amongst social media platforms, as I've talked about before on my show, that we're not giving consent on. So we're agreeing to it, but we're not specifically giving that direct consent. But so far, there's been nothing that has tackled the social media platforms. And so the thing is that we had that Supreme Court decision that came out I think it was in March or April, I did a couple shows on it, where Google was being sued from a family who had gotten killed by ISIS. And they were saying, hey, you aided this encampment. You aided these people in getting a following in order to execute this terrorist attack that killed my loved ones. But it was a bigger thing than that, because it went to one of the cruxes of the social media platforms, where they can say, oh, we're not responsible for the content. We're not creating it. They're creating it. So therefore we're clear. Our hands are clean, which is not true. But the point is that the Supreme Court agreed with that decision. And they said, yeah, you can't do that. And so all of the social media platforms breathed another sigh of relief, and now they just continue to share our data. But the fact that a casual user of Tinder could have 800 pages of data on her with all of these different algorithms of exactly what she's doing will show you, or hopefully give you an insight to the breadth of information. You know, you scroll through Facebook. We scroll through Instagram. All of us are on Instagram. We support each other all the time. Like, right? So they know we're friends. They know we're part of AMP. They know that we're supporting each other. They know that we're part of the metal community, etc. There's all this data that we're giving away that they're just collecting. And this is Americans. This is China. This is other countries. This is countries collecting it, because ByteDance has TikTok for the rest of the world. And then it has another TikTok version for China only, so they can monitor exactly what's going on with their people. And then there's countries like India who's banned it completely. And, you know, I mean, that's a different topic, but yes, they were collecting the information, and I do believe that they were selling it. And she actually wrote a book that I wanted to get, but it's only in French, and I do not speak French, so therefore I would not be able to read it, but it looked pretty fucking interesting. So as part of last week, Biden signed the executive order for the semiconductor investments. And by the way, Humberto, thank you so much for telling me that, because I always question stuff like that. When politicians say things, I'm like, is that really how it works? Is that, I mean, could they, and this was both parties have been saying this. I'm like, because it sounds like it could be true that they could be, the semiconductors they're sending us could be tracking our movements or tracking our IP data. That sounds like that could be possible. That could be a thing. But I don't know if it really is. And so Humberto has let us know that, in fact, you cannot do that. So that's very important. And this is where politicians are also ignorant, or they're knowledgeable in their neglect of telling us the complete truth and saying things to get us to sway to one side or the other, which is my bone of contention with politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, right? So, and in tandem with the executive order on the semiconductor, Biden has also requested an additional $24 billion in Ukraine need to support Ukraine, and then an additional $12 billion more for disaster relief because of the Maui fires, which we would talk about here in a second. So I was like, how much money have we given Ukraine? Right? Because the thing is that you always hear one party or the other, oh, we're supporting all these other countries and we need to focus on America. So I was like, okay, but how much money are we actually giving away? Now, this data is current data, but it's not deep dive data. So don't be like, oh, Mel, I did this research and it says blah, blah. Okay, look, just fucking go with me. I'm trying to give you an idea. And this was not the focus of my show, but to keep everything in context, which if you've listened to my show before, you know is very important to me. So as of June 2nd of this year, we have given Ukraine $113 billion. Okay, so to put that in context, just so you guys remember, our entitlement programs within our budget for Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare is about $2.3 trillion. Okay, so $113 billion is a fuck ton of money, don't get me wrong, but it's not the trillions that we spend on, which 2/3 of our United States budget goes on. And I just want you guys to keep those numbers in context because we're talking about big numbers. And if somebody says 113 billion and you don't have that number in context, then you think we're giving away the farm to Ukraine. We're not giving away the farm to Ukraine. Are we helping them? Yes, we absolutely are helping them. And that number, to the best of my knowledge, I do not know if it includes the weapons that we've given Ukraine, but the weapons we've given Ukraine are old weapons, okay, for whatever that's worth. They're not our newest cutting edge weapons. But we have, as of June 2nd, given $113 billion, okay? So I said, okay, well, how much are we giving to other people? Just so I can kind of understand that. So the top 10 countries that the United States provides aid to is Afghanistan at $4.89 billion, Israel at $3.3 billion, Jordan at $1.72 billion, Egypt at $1.46 billion, Iraq at $960 million, Ethiopia at $922 million, Yemen at $809 million, Colombia $800 million, Nigeria $793 million, and Lebanon at $790 million, which if you take all of those 10 countries and you add them up, it is still significantly less than what we have given to Ukraine. Okay, but we don't typically give aid to Ukraine, right? But those 10 countries that I told you, they're pretty standard. We've been giving support to them to help them for a number of years now over multiple administrations, all right? So with all of that combined, you can say, wow, we're giving a lot of money to Ukraine. Well, yes, we are. However, why are we doing that? Well, yes, Russia is not our ally. That's clear. Let me take a drink of water. Sorry. My throat is still really kind of fucked up from being sick last week. So the reason why they're doing that is because it's still cheaper than war. And again, if Russia attacks a NATO country or does something like that, then we are going to be in a full-fledged war. So $113 billion is small potatoes versus how much a war could be. So I looked up some statistics. The Vietnam War cost us at the time $168 billion. So we've given $113 billion to Ukraine. At the time of the Vietnam War, it cost us as America, our economy, our people, $168 billion at the time, or the equivalent of $1 trillion in today's dollars. So there's million, billion, trillion. Okay, so trillion, but the difference between a billion and a trillion is far and away, you guys. It's like massive. It's not like counting from 100 to 200. Like the gap between a million and a billion is big, but a billion and a trillion is ginormous. That's why so far we don't have any trillionaires. We have billionaires when we used to have millionaires, right? So we stair step. So that would be about the equivalent of 1 trillion in today's dollars. And that included at the time 111 billion in military operations and 28.5 billion in aid to South Vietnam. And this was data as of March 29th of 2022. Okay. Now, military spending in the United States with the Korean War due to the Cold War at the time costs $30 billion in 1953, which would be the equivalent of $341 billion in 2011. Okay, so obviously that would be significantly higher now, but those are the most recent statistics that I could find. So we've given $113 billion to Ukraine, which is a lot of money, but if we had to fight a war with Russia, if we get dragged into a war, not only does it cost American lives, but it costs a fuck ton more money, y'all. Desert Storm, which was in August of 1990. A lot of you guys might have remembered that. My dad had to go over that. The total included in that was about $50 billion, and I don't have an updated number. So this was a $50 billion in 1990, and it put about 540,000 personnel into Desert Storm. And it also made us, we forgave $7 billion in debt. So from Egypt. So Egypt owed us $7 billion in debt, and we wiped that clean, which means we ate it. So we didn't really wipe it clean. We still ate it. So we still had to take that on. So the bottom line is that supplying Ukraine with weapons keeps American troops out of there, and in the hopes that if we supply them with enough weaponry, that Russia will not take them over, or Russia will not drag us into World War III. And so when we're looking at the financial alignments, you always need to follow the money. And so we're talking about China aligning with Russia. We're talking about the second largest economy in the world, and we're talking about the United States being the first. So I'm going to play my last song. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to talk really quickly about the Maui wildfires. Fuck. I am done talking for today. The Maui wildfires and the rest of my stuff I'm going to save for Friday's show. And so for those of you who don't know, my shows are Wednesday and Friday morning, 6 a.m. Pacific time till typically about 7:30 for an hour and a half. But today I'm going to wrap it up early because I just really need to sit and lay down for just a half a second. So I'm going to play a quick song. This is Little Things by Bush. I shut your mouth. My wiener is food. That's the fucking lyric in the song. Cracks me up every time I sing that part with abandon. I fucking love it so much. It cracks me up. So I'm going to move on to my last story, and then Kodak is going to be starting. Well, he'll be starting here in a couple minutes, but his dad is coming on to talk about what he remembers of Woodstock. So that I'm sure is going to be a pretty epic show. And we're going to move on to the Maui wildfires. So far, I think the estimation is 96 people dead. And you might remember that there was the California wildfires that broke out a couple years ago where 85 people died. So this is considered the most deadliest disaster in Hawaiian history since it became a state. Now, they have not officially announced what caused it, but the assumption is that it is part of the power grid. So I have talked on my show, and I did a full show on finances, the other F word, on the power grid and how our power grid is old as fuck, y'all. And there are parts of our power grid that are 50 plus years old. And one of the things I was talking about at the very top of the hour is cybersecurity and cyber attacks. And our power grid is very susceptible to cyber attacks. And part of the upkeep of our power grid is how the United States government tries to keep that infrastructure up, because it's extremely expensive to fix, is they give natural monopolies. They grant natural monopolies, which I've talked about on my show before. But to remind you, a natural monopoly is a monopoly that is basically given by the government. So Nevada Energy is a natural monopoly here in Nevada. That's our utility company. If you want power, that's where you go. And they have a natural monopoly because the trade-off for that is that they are supposed to be upkeeping the power grid here in Nevada. And in order to do that, because it's so expensive, they get the rights to have a monopoly and have basically everybody have to use them. That's what a natural monopoly does. And I talked last week on my show about climate change and the numbers behind climate change. But one of the things that's been happening is that when it gets hot, the metal expands and your power lines start to droop. And when the power lines come in contact with bushes and trees, they start wildfires. Okay. And so we saw this with PG&E in California. And now the confirmed official start of the fire, they believe, was caused by the power grid, which is under the control of Hawaiian Electric Industries. Now, I also did an episode called Texas Deep Freeze on Finance is the Other F Word, where I dove into Texas and the deregulation of their power grid and how, due to that fact, there is a whole bunch of these private companies coming in and like giving free electricity away for the weekend and then discounting stuff on holidays and doing all this crazy shit. But nobody was keeping track or keeping the upkeep on the power grid. And so when they got a very cold winter, it fucked them really bad. And it was not a good thing. And I do not like monopolies of any kind. However, I can see kind of the point for it, but obviously the outdated infrastructure is still causing things like this Maui wildfire. So once it officially does get announced that it was caused by a power line, we are expected to see an inflood of class actions. And there's already people that are getting class actions together to go against them. We've seen that their stock has dropped over 40% since the Maui wildfires, because people are pricing in the fact that, okay, you guys fucked up and this is probably where this wildfire started. Now, if they find that it's something else, then that'll be a different story. But they're pretty confident it's from the power grid. And what we're seeing is that we're seeing that people are coming into Maui and they're trying to either loot or squat, or they're getting contacted by investment real estate people trying to buy land that their crumbled houses on, which I think is absolutely completely despicable. And between that and the looting and the fact that and I've talked about this on my show before, 90% of what goes into Hawaii, 90% of all of their food and their staples is imported. 90%, you guys. So if you want to get back on the world war tip, they are an outlier for the United States. That and of course Alaska, right? But at least Alaska is attached by land. So anything that comes into Hawaii has a delay on it. So there's a lot of resources that are not yet at Hawaii, as these people are trying to find food, find clean drinking water, protect their land, protect, different parts of their house that has fallen down. And so the lawsuits are expected to be coming in on Hawaiian Electric. And like I said, the stock market is already pricing it in. So basically, they're saying, we already know that you guys are going to be liable, so we're just going to hands off on your stocks, and we'll have to see specifically what happens. But the risks of the vulnerabilities of our power grid from cyber attack, from cutting off equipment, and they do have different software programs that they've implemented in our power grid to kind of crawl our power grid to find things that are broken or things that are, might be a fire hazard. And so then what they can do is they can pinpoint exactly where that is, and then crews come out directly to that spot and then fix whatever it is on that spot. That's very helpful, but it doesn't take away the vulnerability of just the fact of that our infrastructure is so old. And that is going to continue to be an issue, because protecting it from cyber attacks, but also protecting it from the effects of global warming. And so what we're starting to see is, because of the wildfires that have been happening, is that California, Oregon, and Nevada have decided to preemptively shut off power when there's high winds or when there's dry winds. Because if you have, and like we get a lot of wind through Nevada, we're in a valley, through Las Vegas, not Nevada, Las Vegas, because we're in a valley. And so we're seeing that companies are starting to preemptively turn off power in certain sections in the attempt that if a power line goes down or if it's drooping because it's hot and it hits a tree, that there is no spark, that there is no trigger into a wildfire. And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that is still going on with our power grid, but at this point, it looks like the blame is falling squarely on Hawaiian Electric and their power grid and their power lines, which, like I said, is something that I've covered before. So I'm going to look at chat real quick. Okay, there's nothing else in chat, so that's awesome. So I will see you guys back here Friday morning at 6 a.m. Pacific time. I don't know what I'll be talking about. But I always try to find things that are of interest, and then I want to find context around those things, because I don't want you guys to, numbers don't lie, and they don't care how you feel. They're numbers. And if you can take a lot of the hot button topics and you can just put it into a number standpoint, it takes away a lot of the preconceived notions that go along with it. Plus, it kind of cuts through the mud of what is exactly at the heart of whatever it is that they're trying to do. So the stories that I present are always in that vein. And one of the stories I will be covering Friday is the mass exodus out of bonds, which is what led to Silicon Valley Bank's collapse. And I warned you guys a couple weeks ago that the reason why the interest rate hikes are so bad is because they could affect and ripple through our banking system again. And we're starting to see the first effects of that. So that will be a story that I'll pick up Friday along with some other shit. You're welcome. You're welcome, Tabor. I always love to see you on here. Dream, I love you. You always come through and give me so much support. I appreciate it. And if you guys have topics that you want me to cover, you can hit me up on Instagram and direct message me. Other than that, you guys have a great day. I'll see you on your shows. And Amp, I am out this bitch. I'm going to get me some caffeine and rest. Peace, y'all.
Thanks for listening. If you like us, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.